In Australia, the pattern feels familiar. A price jumps at Coles or Woolworths. Everyone says it is temporary. Fuel, supply pressure, inflation, bad weather. And that makes sense. But then some of that pressure eases, the crisis fades, and the price still stays there. And this is not just an Australian story. It is one of those patterns that shows up across markets. A visible problem pushes prices up. Then later, even when that problem starts fading, the higher price remains. Not always. Not on every product, but often enough that people notice it. So why does that happen? Why do grocery prices rise like a temporary response, then stay high like a permanent decision? Because the shock that raised the price is often not the same thing that keeps it there. This is what makes grocery shopping feel so frustrating now. It is not just that food got more expensive. It is that the increase feels sticky. You remember what certain things used to cost. Bread, cereal, cooking oil, frozen food, snacks, basic staples. Then the price jumps. And even when the original explanation starts fading into the background, the shelf price rarely seems to fully return. That creates a strange gap. You are told the increase was tied to a specific problem, but what you experience feels much more permanent. And most people think about prices in a simple way. If the cause fades, the price should fade too. That feels logical. But grocery pricing does not really work like a reverse button. Once a higher price survives long enough, the system around it begins to adjust. Retailers adjust, suppliers adjust, shoppers adjust, and once that happens, the higher price can stop looking temporary inside the system, even if it still feels temporary in your memory. If you want more clear, system-based explanations like this, subscribe to Logic Behind It. The first layer is the obvious one. Grocery prices do often rise for real reasons. Transport gets more expensive. Energy gets more expensive. Ingredients get more expensive. Labor pressure builds. Weather affects supply. Currency movements affect imports. So the initial increase is often not imaginary. But here is the important part. Prices do not usually move up and down in perfect symmetry. They are often faster on the way up than on the way down. Part of that is because one shelf price sits on top of a long chain. There is the producer, the processor, the packaging cost, the freight cost, the warehouse cost, the retailer, then the store itself, with labor, refrigeration, rent, and waste. So even if one cost improves, that does not mean the whole structure underneath suddenly resets. That is one reason prices do not simply snap back. But it still does not explain the full stickiness. Because even when the most visible pressure eases, businesses often leave the new price where it is. That is where the deeper mechanism begins. When a business raises prices during a clear external shock, it is not only reacting, it is also learning. It is learning what customers will continue to pay. That matters because pricing is not just about cost. It is also about demand, margin, competition, and what the market can absorb without too much pushback. So imagine a retailer, supplier, or major brand lifts prices during a period of obvious inflation pressure. Customers may not like it, they may complain, they may cut back a little. But if they mostly keep buying, the system has learned something useful. The higher price works, maybe not perfectly, maybe some volume softens, but not enough to make the increase fail. And once that happens, the logic changes. At first, the question is, can we raise this without losing too much demand? Later, the question becomes, why lower it unless we have to? That is a very different kind of pricing environment. From the shopper's side, the increase still feels like a temporary response to a temporary problem. But from inside the system, the higher price may now look like a tested level the market accepted. That does not mean costs stop mattering. It means costs are only one part of what keeps the price where it is. Once the new price survives, it stops being just a reaction. It becomes a reference point. So the shelf price is not only reacting to supply pressure, it is also reacting to what the system learned while that pressure was happening. That is the hidden shift. The crisis explains the increase, but customer adaptation helps explain why it stays. Once higher prices remain in place long enough, the market starts reorganizing around them. And three things help lock that in. First, people's reference points reset. At first, a price jump feels shocking because you are comparing it to the old number in your head. But over time, that old number weakens. You still feel the pain. But the comparison changes. The new price becomes the number you plan around. That matters because businesses do not need people to enjoy the higher price. They only need people to gradually treat it as real. Once that happens, reversing it becomes less necessary. Second, promotions can replace true price reversals. This is a big one in grocery retail. Instead of bringing the regular shelf price back down, retailers can keep the base price high and use specials to create moments of relief. That gives them flexibility. They can run timed discounts, push loyalty offers, rotate deals across categories, drive traffic without fully resetting the normal price. So from the shopper's point of view, it can feel like bargains still exist. But the baseline underneath may have permanently moved upward. That is not the same as prices going back down. It is relief inside a more expensive system. Third, shoppers adapt instead of fully resisting. This may be the most important part. When grocery prices rise, most people do not stop shopping. They cannot. So they adapt in quieter ways. They switch brands. They buy more home brand products. They wait for specials. They skip extras. They shrink the basket. They compare stores more carefully. That means the system does not need demand to remain perfect. It only needs it to remain strong enough. And because the adjustment happens through everyday behavior, rather than one dramatic collapse, higher prices can hold much longer than people expect. So what feels like, why did this never come back down, is often the result of a chain reaction. The shock raises the price. The system tests it. Customers adapt around it. And the new level starts settling in. And this is why the pattern matters beyond Australia. Australia is just a useful place to notice it. The supermarket experience is concentrated enough, familiar enough, and emotionally close enough to daily life that the pattern stands out quickly. But the deeper mechanism shows up across countries. Different markets have different supply chains, different cost structures, different levels of competition, different inflation histories. But the same basic pattern appears again and again. A visible shock creates pricing permission. Businesses discover what the market will absorb. Consumers adjust instead of fully opting out. And the higher level becomes harder to reverse than people expect. So this is not really a story about one supermarket chain or one country. It is part of a broader pricing system that becomes easier to see once you know what to look for. That is why grocery prices can feel so unfair. People think in terms of causes. If shipping costs came down, prices should come down. If supply recovered, prices should recover. If inflation slowed, the shelf should look better. But grocery pricing is not just a mirror of costs. It is a mix of costs, incentives, competition, customer tolerance, promotion strategy, and changing shopping behavior. So the more accurate way to think about it is this. The original pressure may explain why the price moved. But the reason it stayed high is often that the system found a new level it could live with. And once that happens, going back down is no longer automatic. It becomes a strategic choice. And strategic choices usually move slower than crises. Of course, this is only one layer behind the pattern. Food prices are also shaped by wages, energy, rent, weather, currency movements, and local competition. But this is one of the less visible reasons a temporary increase can become a lasting one. So when a grocery price jumps and never really seems to come back, it does not always mean the original emergency is still fully there. Sometimes the emergency did not just raise the price. It gave the system permission to keep it there. The shock got prices moving. But adaptation is often what kept them there.